And appreciate everybody being here. Certainly appreciate Yvonne giving me the opportunity to talk about emotional sobriety and to both AA and Al-Anon. I was on the meeting early this morning to listen to Rick, and I hope you're still on. I really enjoyed what I got to hear. Fortunately, I had to talk at another meeting at 10 o'clock, so just got back on. But anyway, I like to talk about emotional sobriety. I think I know it's important in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I certainly believe it's important for any 12-step program that there is. The reason that when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, my sobriety date is September 21st of 1976. And I thought when I first got here to Alcoholics Anonymous that the disease of alcoholism was a drinking problem. I believe that to my absolute core. I am far from a high bottom alcoholic. It's not like I had a cocktail too much and walked through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got here when I was 28 years old. I came through the doors unemployed and unemployable. I'd been that way for a year and a half. And 3 years prior to that, I went to work for a company when I was 20 in the sales business. And when I was a good salesperson. And I got promoted maybe 6 or 8 months later. And then I got a second promotion, and then a third, and then a fourth. And I moved myself right up the ranks in that company. And when I was 25 years old, I was named national sales manager of that firm. I grew up in a middle class, maybe upper middle class area, a place called Far Rockaway, New York. I always say we got some claims to fame there. It was a little beach town, but we had some pretty famous people that grew up there from all ends of the spectrum. Michael Landon grew up there, went to the same high school I did. Dr. Joyce Brothers grew up there, and Bernie Madoff grew up there. So we got all ends of the spectrum. My parents taught me the difference between right and wrong. I had a good upbringing. There was nothing dysfunctional in my home except for me. My dad was a hardworking guy, and at 25 years old, I'm named national sales manager of this company. I'm making more money than my father, my parents ever dreamed of making in their life. I've got hundreds and hundreds of people that work for me. This company had 6 offices around the country. They moved I was married by that time. They moved my wife and I from New York out to the Los Angeles area of California. And I ran the whole show for them, flying around the country, training salespeople, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, boy, I've arrived. Now, I saw something. I had done some drinking and a lot of drugging as a teenager, but I saw something growing up. And what that was is my father went to work. He came home at the end of the day. He and my mother sat down and had a drink together. And then my mother, this was the late 50s, early 60s. My mother went into the kitchen and made dinner. And the family came in and we all ate together. So I thought, okay, now that's what I'm supposed to do. So I come home and I don't understand the disease of alcoholism, but my wife and I had a drink together, and then she went to make dinner and I'd have a second drink and a third and a fourth. And all of a sudden I'm drunk, and some nights I'm going for dinner. Other nights I say, hey, I'm going out for a while, and it gets worse and worse and worse. By the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm sitting at one of my early meetings, and it was a speaker meeting, and the speaker makes a statement at that meeting. But then what he said, and it just blew me away when he said it. I thought, what a bunch of bull hunky this is. But what he said, for anybody that's sitting in the room that's alcoholic, I'll say the same thing at this meeting. I know we have a lot of Al-Anons, a lot of AAs. For any AA that's in this room, there's 211 people. For any of us that are alcoholic, there's only 3 things that can ever happen to any alcoholic. One is the person will die from the disease of alcoholism, like cirrhosis, something like that, or what he termed a related disorder, which was something I had never heard of before. And he explained a related disorder. That was like a drunk driving accident or a heart that gives out. I had a guy I sponsored, I was close with. He was sober 4 years, and decided he didn't need as much AA. Money became real important to him. And he got further and further away from AA. And By the way, step over here. This is my pretty wife because I'm going to talk about her for a bit.
I'm so sorry.
Anyway, he got further and further away from AA and decided a drink would taste good. And he started to drink again, and he couldn't get sober. You know, there's an old and true saying in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it at all. But for an alcoholic, drinking is like having sex with a gorilla. You stop when the gorilla wants, not when you want. And that's what happened to this guy. He started to drink again, and one drink led to another. Things got worse and worse. And I would talk to him throughout this, and try to get sober again. And finally he did. And he called me. He had about 3 or 4 or 5 days, something like that. And he said, "Ron, I can't go back into the meetings and say I'm new." He said, "My ego is just too big to walk back in and say I threw away 4 years." And I talked to him about the importance of being honest. And on a Monday night, I went to a meeting, and he was there. And he finally said, "I've got 8 days. My name is such and such, and I'm back, and I've got 8 days again." But then he said this, and my heart broke. And he said, "You know what? It really wasn't that bad out there." And my wife wants me to come back at Alcoholics Anonymous. She was married. He had 4 small children under 12 years old. And anyway, that was a Monday night. Tuesday, the gorilla said, "I'm not done." And he started to drink again Tuesday, and he drank again Wednesday. He drove over a friend's house, partied with the friend, went to sleep that night, and never woke up again on Thursday. So when the man said there's only 3 things that can ever happen to an alcoholic, one is we'll die from the disease of alcoholism or a related disorder. On his death certificate, it says his heart gave out. He said the second thing that can happen to an alcoholic is that we will be locked up in jail or a mental institution for the rest of our lives. He said the third thing that will happen to an alcoholic is that we'll get sober and stay sober for the rest of our lives. And he said Alcoholics Anonymous has the best success rate at keeping people sober. Now, I was only sober certainly less than a week, maybe, 3, 4, 5 days. And when he said that, I said a 2-word sentence under my breath, but certainly loud enough that the people near me heard what I said. First word was bull. You can figure out the second word. And I shook my head no. And 2 men came up to me after that meeting, and they said to me, can we talk to your son? And I said, sure. We went outside the meeting hall, and one of them looked at me. I'll never forget this. And he said, and back in 1976, when I got sober, to go into a bar and have a gin and tonic cost $1. And he took $1 out of his wallet. And he said, "You know what, kid?" He said, "I don't care if you stay here in Alcoholics Anonymous or not. You want to get drunk here, the first one's on me." He took $1 out and he handed it to me. He said, "First one's on me. We don't care if you stay here or not." He said, "But if you want help, here's my business card. Here's my phone number at work." He wrote his home phone number underneath. He said, "You want help? I'll do anything I can to help you to stay sober. But if you want to drink, that's your business." But then he or the other guy, I don't remember which one, said this, and it was the magic words to say to a salesperson. And what he said to me, he said, "We're not here to sell you on whether you're an alcoholic or not, or whether you should stay here in Alcoholics Anonymous." And like I said, that was the magic words to say to me as a salesperson. He said, "But I'll tell you this." He said, "Alcoholism is a progressive illness. It gets worse. It never gets better." He said, "All we ask you to do is look back on your life. Is your life worse now than it was a few years ago?" A friend of mine says this, and I kind of stole it from him, and I say this in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, kind of tongue in cheek, but, it comes from what this guy said to me. We know that anybody that's new, and I don't care if it's AA or Al-Anon, okay, we're in June of 2020. I can guarantee you that 2020 has not been the best year of your life, because none of us get here on a winning streak. I certainly didn't. And the man said, "Look back on your life. Is it worse now than it was a few years ago?" 25 years old, I'm named national sales manager of this company. 28 years old, I walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I am unemployed. I am unemployable. I've been that way for a year and a half. I am in more trouble than I ever knew what to do with. And I couldn't stop drinking no matter what I did. And I tried over and over and over and over to give up drinking. And it wasn't because of my wife, who was an Al-Anon at that time. It was because of me. I never swore off to her. I never swore off to my parents. I wasn't working, so I didn't swear off to a boss. I swore off to me morning after morning after morning. I would come to, and I would be sick, and I would be hungover. And I tell myself, I'll never do this again, and mean it with everything I had. And I'd be drunk again within a day, maybe two tops. And I mean, I didn't try to stop drinking once or twice. This was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times I would come to and say, never again. I'll never be this sick. I'll never be this hungover. I'll never be in this much trouble. And I'd mean it. You know, I learned my lesson last time. And when I came off that last drunk, which was September 21st of that year, I remember coming to the next morning and saying to me, I can't stop. No matter what I do, I'm going to be drunk again today. And I knew it. I knew it without a shadow of a doubt that I had no choice as to whether to drink or not. And it popped in my mind about 5 years earlier than this. My mother had told me about a friend of hers that went to Alcoholics Anonymous and stayed sober. And with my keen intellect, you're going to find, because I'm supposed to talk for, this is a 2.5 hour meeting, that I am not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I think I am. And my keen intelligence said to me, I came to on a Wednesday morning. My keen intelligence said, if Alcoholics Anonymous works, which I doubt if it will, I really do. I think I'll probably be drunk again by the end of today. But if it works, maybe I can stay sober Wednesday. Maybe I can stay sober Thursday. Maybe even part of Friday. And if it really works, all day Friday. But I knew, because I'm so smart, that nobody stays sober weekends. And that's the best thinking I had. Nobody can stay sober weekends. And that's over 43 years ago. So Alcoholics Anonymous has worked in my life. Alcoholics Anonymous is the glue that holds everything else together. Holds everything else together. I have a life today that is better than anything I could have ever imagined. That pretty lady that I put in front of the screen, next month we'll be married 50 years. That's a long time because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and what it's done in my life. That's the most important relationship in my life. I've got 2 daughters. I've got 2.5 granddaughters. My youngest is expecting her second child in 6 months or so. I worked for one of the largest companies in the United States, and they treated me really well. I was able to sell my practice and retire a few years ago. I've got a life today in and because of Alcoholics Anonymous and a God that I came to believe in after coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. That's better than anything I could have ever imagined. So why emotional sobriety? You know, why is that important? Isn't it physical sobriety that counts? Isn't alcoholism a disease of drinking? And that's what I believed for a long time. And yet in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, on page 239, there's some writings by a guy by the name of Dr. Bauer. And when Dr. Bauer wrote this, he was one of the heads of the American Medical Association. So this isn't a small-time doctor, all right? And what he wrote, he said this. He said, we know, of course, that the alcoholic is a sick person. That is a very simple phrase. It is today a phrase that is widely and generally accepted. And yet you and I know that it was not so long ago that the alcoholic was regarded as a nuisance, a pest, a person who could snap out of it if he really wanted to. He is regarded as a spoiled brat and as a no-good. Today we know he is an individual who is sick. Now we know that about alcoholics, but this is the part I didn't know. And we know that he is sick in an area of which our understanding is perhaps the least of any area in medicine, namely an illness of the emotions. An illness of the emotions. See, I've never met an alcoholic, myself included, that isn't thin-skinned, that doesn't get our feelings hurt easily. And I know this is true not only for alcoholics, but Al-Anon. I know 100%. I'll just talk from the alcoholic side of things. A person like me, just this disease of the emotions, how that manifests itself in my life, okay, is I believe deep down that before I was put into this lifetime, God gave me a gift that I am supposed to share with anybody. And what that gift is God told me, and I'm probably the only one in the world, and if you relate to this, welcome to a brain like mine, a disease of the emotions. God gave me this gift. And what that is, I am the only one in the world that knows the true way people should live. And my job in life is to point out your mistakes, especially if you're close to me. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, Yvonne understands that kind of thinking. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, as I said, Dr. Bauer talks about this disease of the emotions. Our big book talks about why is emotional sobriety so important. And what it says this on page 51 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink problem, they talk about why life was so unsatisfactory. Okay, why is that important? Because most people, if you have an alcoholic in your life, or for the people that are on the meeting that are from Alcoholics Anonymous, most of us, if you're like me, I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and for the first couple of years of my sobriety, I grew like a weed. I really did. I grew like a weed, and I think that is very, very, very common. I went back to work. I said to my sponsor, I should get a job as sales manager again. He said, no, get a crappy job, see what that leads to. I did. I got a rotten job at first. Then I got a better job and a better job and a better job. And it led from there. But I went back to work. I started to get some money in my pocket because one of the things my early sponsor said to me, he said, part of sobriety is responsibility, Ron. He says, you've got a wife and an infant baby. You got to go back to work. You've got to support those people. You've got to pay your bills. And he taught me that kind of stuff. And I started to grow. The drinking problem went away. For anybody, that comes from the type of background that I do, where you blacked out and you come to in the morning. I never had breakfast in the morning. I was sick and I was hungover every morning. Now all of a sudden I'm sober and I'm starting to get my health back a little bit. So I'm growing like a weed. But all of a sudden, years later, not a lot of years, 4 years later, I find that emotionally, because of this disease of the emotions, that emotionally, I'm still the same man sober I was drunk. And I don't understand that. I don't understand why I can't walk in my house and not get into another fight. Don't understand that in the least. Why am I one person when I go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I learn to talk the talk? Because I don't care what 12-step program you're in. I meet people all over the country anyway that are like me. I was in the beginning, okay? I would go to meetings. I'd listen to people that had time, that sounded good, and I want to fit in. So I say what they say in the meeting. I learned how to parrot what people say. As well as being an alcoholic, I'm a copycat. So I go to meetings. I listen to the old timers say something good. They would. They'd say something like, turn it over. And I would be at a meeting the next day or 2 days later. And as soon as somebody said they had a problem, whatever the problem was, I'd raise my hand and I'd get called on. And I'd look at the person that just said, oh, I was audited by the IRS. And I'd look at the person and I'd say, friend, what you have to learn how to do is turn it over. Meanwhile, I don't even know what the words mean, but I know it sounds good. And I leave the meeting day after day, and I'm walking right back into the same world I left. And I don't understand that. I don't understand that. I don't understand the disease of alcoholism. On page 52 of our big book, it says this. It says, we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. Now, I'm sober over 4 years. I am going to somewhere, a really bad week was 5 meetings. I probably averaged 7 meetings a week. A good week was 10 meetings. I'm in service. I'm secretarying meetings. I was on the committee for the conference in San Fernando Valley. I'm sponsoring 2 guys back then. I think I'm doing the deal. But I had only worked the steps once. I worked them when I was sober about 10 months. I went through all 12 steps. If you would have attached a lie detector test to me at 4 years of sobriety and said, Ron, you got all this stuff going on. You're fighting with your wife. You have problems at work. You have emotional problems like anxiety or depression. You can't seem to shut your head off. You're a self-talker. You talk to yourself about straightening out the day. I don't know if anybody else is like me. By the time I got out of the shower in the morning, I'd already been in 2 arguments in my head. I had people I needed to straighten out at work or whatever. And you're going through all this stuff and the answer's in the steps. And if you would have attached a lie detector test to me and said, Ron, your answer's in the steps, I would have said to you, I've done the steps. And the lie detector, the needle would have never quivered because I went through all 12 steps. But I never understood that I had to learn how to take the steps out of the book and apply them in my life. That's what I'm going to be talking about during this talk. And, again, just to give you some examples of what I call alcoholism, it says this. It says we were having problems with personal relationships. This isn't drunk, okay? This is the way a person like me feels once I sober up. I'm having problems with personal relationships. In other words, people hurt my feelings all the time. They say things to me, and I take them personally. I can't control my emotional nature. Okay, I'm a pride of misery and depression. Anybody here ever feel down? I can't make a living. That doesn't mean I can't make money, but I don't get along with the people I work with. I have a feeling of uselessness. I'm full of fear and I'm unhappy. I couldn't seem to be a real help to other people. My sponsors took me back to the beginning of the big book where Dr. Silkworth writes something. And what he says is this. An alcoholic, after that person gets sober, not before, but after they get sober, they feel restless. Inside, these are inner feelings, okay? They're restless. They're irritable. In other words, people make me angry. I self-talk. I'm discontented inside myself. And this is the difference between me as an alcoholic and people on this call that are not alcoholic, okay? I feel that way, and maybe some of you feel that way, unless, this is my medicine, unless I can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, which come at once by taking a few drinks. See, that's the disease of alcoholism. I'm uncomfortable with life unless I drink again. Or, and it says, after they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops. In other words, now I take the first drink to shut off this head. Now the allergy kicks in, and I get drunk, and I get in trouble, and I swear off again. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful. I did that a ton of times. I tell my wife, I'm sorry for what I did. Give me another chance. With a firm resolution not to drink again. I told you that was my life over and over and over. This is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his or her recovery. So I needed emotional sobriety. Because at 4.5 years of sobriety, Anna and I had what we called an in and out marriage during those years. And I'm willing to bet we got 235 people on this call. I'm willing to bet $20 right now that there is a lot of people that'll understand this. During those first 4.5 years of sobriety, our relationship was what we called an in and out relationship. Now, that does not mean that we went to In-N-Out hamburgers on Friday night. That is the kind of relationship where you call a house one day and I'm living in it. You call the next day, I'm moving back out. You call the next day, I'm back in because we made up. You call the next day, I'm back out because I keep seeing things wrong. At the meeting I had to speak out this morning, one of the guys, I think he's probably on this call now, Virgil pointed something out he heard me say, and it's so true for me, okay? I told you, we're married 50 years. Almost 50 years. I'm going to tell you how the disease of alcoholism works in my life, okay? I think God gave me another gift besides knowing how everybody else should live. I also, and I bet another $20 that a lot of people have this. I can actually read your minds. Okay? I see people nodding and smiling. Now, I'll tell you how that works in my life. Okay? Anybody that's over 50 years old knows this. Okay? Men and women internally have different body clocks as far as the temperature that a room should be. So Ann and I will be watching TV together. We're in the living room watching it, and the room is perfect. Any guy on this meeting, I don't know how many out of the 235 people are men. I can't look through all of that. But every guy, Hank in Vallejo knows it. Every guy on this meeting knows that this is the truth, okay? When you watch TV, a room should be 68 degrees. That is the perfect temperature, and that is what it is set at. But now I'm 72 years old. When we watch TV together, most men have prostate problems. We don't get to watch hour or 2-hour shows without going to the bathroom at a commercial. So a commercial comes a half hour into whatever show we're watching. I go to the bathroom. I come back. I lay down on the couch. And Ann has gone over to the thermometer, and she has turned it to 75 degrees. Now, I told you, part of my alcoholism, and if you're married to one, he or she's got the same thing going. We can read your mind. And I'm going to tell you what happens because hot air is blowing right in my face, and I know what that means. And what that means is she does not love me anymore. What that means, it's time for a divorce, and I need to call a divorce attorney. Now, I sponsor 2 men that are psychiatrists, and they both tell me I'm what they call passive aggressive. That's a tough person to live with because I don't say anything like, why did you turn the temperature to 75? I just give her the look. You guys ever give the look? Like you ruined another day on me. She's watching TV and I'm thinking about divorce. The disease of alcoholism in an alcoholic. Something I never looked at, something I never thought of in my early sobriety. But 4.5 years into it, we're going through this in and out marriage. I'm having problems at work. I'm having emotional problems like anxiety attacks or depression. And I don't know how to change that. I would try and I'd be unable, something would set me off again, and I'd be right back in trouble. 4.5 years into my sobriety, I ran into a guy that without him, I wouldn't be here today. His name was Bob Anderson, God rest his soul. I heard him talk at a meeting, and this was his first meeting. He had lived in California for a while. He moved to Denver, and then he moved back to California. This was his first meeting back, and he spoke about something called untreated alcoholism, which is what I've been talking about. In other words, being sober and being restless, irritable, discontenting, having resentments and fears. And then he flipped the coin over and he talked about finding a way to live through a God that he met in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that allowed him to live comfortably in his own skin. And I asked him for some help after that meeting. He invited me to his place of business the next day, and he became my sponsor. He was my sponsor for the next 17 years until he passed away. And he taught me about the disease of alcoholism. And I asked him, I said, well, how do I get in my life what you have in your life, Bob? And he said, through the 12 steps, Ron, through the 12 steps, you're going to find a relationship with God. And I said, Bob, I worked the 12 steps. I did them when I was sober 10 months, all of them. And he said, no, Ron, not what you've done. He said, I'm going to show you how to take the steps out of the book, off the wall, and apply them in your life so you can get along at home, so you can get along at work, so you don't have all these anxiety attacks. And that's what this man did, and that's what my sponsor, after he passed away, did. Is their whole message was repeated work on all 12 steps. You know, I'm not the only one to hit a bottom in Alcoholics Anonymous. I get to talk a lot, and I'm a very active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And most people with long-term sobriety in AA, and I see this same thing in other 12-step programs, most people that have been here for a long time, we start to take the steps, and along the way we hit bottoms where we say, I have to step up my game. In fact, I heard a tape years ago of Dr. Bob talking, and he said something I thought was really interesting. He said, when we wrote the 12 steps, in the 12th step, we used the word practice these principles. And he said, we did that on purpose. And the reason we did, and I just assumed this was 1935, but they had an Olympics. And he said, the person that won the gold medal at that Olympics certainly was a better swimmer than when they first jumped in the pool when they were a little kid. And he said, that's the reason we use the word practice. We do this stuff over and over and over and over. And I didn't know that. Bill Wilson wrote an article. Bill Wilson hit a bottom in sobriety. And I'll just read a little of that. For anybody that doesn't know, in the book AA or the Language of the Heart, Bill wrote a little letter about emotional sobriety. And he was sober 18 years at this time. And he wrote some things. He says, how to translate a right mental conviction into a right emotional result, and so into easy, happy, and good living. Well, that's not only the neurotics problem, it's the problem of life itself. Okay. You know, we have a lot of people on this meeting, some alcoholics, some not alcoholic, but I think that's what we all want is how do we get comfortable in our own skin? How do we get comfortable when the people closest to us, our spouses, our kids, the people we work with, when they're not doing what we want? How do I stay comfortable in here? And I think that's what we all want, not only Bill or myself or anyone else. He said, that's not only the neurotics problem, it's the problem of life itself. For all of us have got to the point of real willingness to use the right principles in all our affairs. Now, Bill was a depressive, okay? And what he wrote, he said, I've recently come to believe that this can be achieved. I believe so because I began to see it in many benighted ones, folks like you and me, commencing to get results. Last autumn, depression, having no really rational cause at all, almost took me to the cleaners, okay? And I think that happens to a lot of us because of our anxiety or depression or down moods. We know it's coming because I'm a self-talker. I know what's going on. I began to be scared that I was in for another long chronic spell. Considering the grief I've had with depression, it wasn't a bright prospect. I kept asking myself, why can't the 12 steps work to release depression? By the hour, I stared at the St. Francis prayer. It's better to comfort than be comforted. Here was the formula, all right, but why didn't it work? Suddenly, I realized what my basic flaw had always been: dependence. Dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them. See, that's my problem. You don't do what I want, and I push and I shove trying to get what I'm looking for. I'll do that at home, at work, with kids, with friends. Okay. Where am I here? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. I had fought for them, and when defeat came, so did my depression. Okay, so that happened to Bill Wilson. I think it happens to most of us as we stay in 12 steps longer. We start to see that it's more than just what we came in for. We start to see that we have other problems. I already told you my story, and the answer that was given to me by Bob and what's worked for me, okay, I can't talk for anyone else here, I can just talk for me, was continuous work on the steps. It wasn't working them once and getting past them. It's like what Dr. Bob said, continue to practice this stuff. And what I'm going to talk about until about 2:00, and then we'll open it for the next half hour for questions, all right? And I know we're supposed to have a 10-minute break. Yvonne sent me the instructions along the line here, and I follow instructions today. But what's worked for me is continuous work, looking at the steps today. 43 years plus later, what does each step mean to me today? And I look at the steps differently today than I did when I first got here to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it doesn't mean that my way is right, okay? I am not here as a teacher or anything else. I'm just here to share my experience. If you work the program, I don't care if it's AA, Al-Anon, or if you're here from another 12-step program, if you work the program differently than I do and you're getting good results, you're happy, you're free in your own life, you're not picking up your addiction, be that alcohol, drugs, codependency, whatever it is, you're stepping out easy and you're comfortable doing what you're doing, keep doing it. Keep doing it. Just disregard everything I say. But if you're having some problems, maybe try some of the things that I'll be talking about, because all I can share with you is my way, okay? Doesn't mean I work it perfectly. I could bring Ann in here. She tells me my middle name, I should be named Ronnie Wrong-Again Dobin, okay? I make more mistakes than I try. But I don't have it perfectly, but I keep trying. But I can tell you 9 out of 10 days I'm comfortable. 9 out of 10 days I know there's a God that takes care of me. 9 out of 10 days we get along in our own home. I get along with the other people that are in my life. The pandemic doesn't affect me. I'm just comfortable. But sometimes I lose it and it's not even because I'm an alcoholic. It's because I'm a human being. Because I'm a human being, and we're all human beings, and we have emotions. So why the continuous work? Why not do them just once? Because we have a life that's unmanageable. And our big book says this, and this is read in the meetings, or at least the AA meetings all the time. We read chapter 5, okay? And this took me a number of years to hear and really be able to internalize this. Okay, but the end of what we read in chapter 5 says this. It says, the description of the alcoholic. And I know in Al-Anon in some meetings, they also use the big book. Isn't that correct? Just yes, no? Yeah, okay, I see people raising their hand. Well, in AA meetings, we use that all the time. And the end of what we read in chapter 5 says this. It says, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. Idea A, I'm an alcoholic and I cannot manage my own life. Now, in the beginning of my sobriety, I thought what that said is the first step said, I'm powerless over alcohol. My life's unmanageable. Well, if you go from national sales manager of a company to an unemployed bum, it looks like your life's unmanageable. I grew up, I told you, in a good home. I knew the difference between right and wrong. I knew I wasn't meeting my responsibilities. I knew what was going on. I knew the difference between right and wrong, and I was doing a lot of stuff wrong. But once I got sober, I also knew I was doing better sober than I was drunk. And yet this makes a statement. It says, my personal adventures before and after make clear three pertinent ideas. Idea A, I'm an alcoholic and I cannot manage my own life. Before I stopped drinking and after I stopped drinking. Now, that shed some light on something that I found hard to believe because I knew I was doing better. What do you mean my life's unmanageable years after coming to Alcoholics Anonymous? Before and after means today. Why is my life unmanageable? 43 plus years later, I got a good life. I really do. How could my life be unmanageable? And I needed to find those answers out. My sponsor helped me with it. The willingness to even look in this direction helped me with it. To have an open mind to say, let me take a look at this. Is this even true? Whatever 12-step program you're on, is this even true for me? And I had to start to look at that. And Bob showed me something in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, by a guy by the name of Harry Tiebout. Now, Harry Tiebout is the only member of Alcoholics Anonymous in history. He was a doctor. He was a psychiatrist that worked with a lot of our early members. He was a psychiatrist to Bill Wilson, one of our founders. He was a psychiatrist to Marty Mann, she was the lady that started National Council on Alcoholism. And so he was voted into Alcoholics Anonymous in 1939 by proxy. And he wrote a lot of pamphlets. You can Google them if you want some of the talks, because he did a lot of talks to the American Medical Association. There's also a book called Harry Tiebout, The Collected Writings. You can buy on Hazelton about a lot of the talks that he did. Again, you can Google it for free. It's in the book, part of it's in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. And he wrote some things that explain to me why my life is unmanageable, which is important to me. Maybe it is to some of you, okay? But it certainly is to me. Why is my life unmanageable today, years after coming to Alcoholics Anonymous? And the reason is this. What he said is, this is on page 249 of AA Comes of Age. He says, as I have already stated, the fact of hitting bottom to produce a surrender. See, that's what happens to all of us. I don't care what 12-step program you're in. Something happened in my life. It was alcohol coming to on the morning of September 22nd, 1976, and saying, I can't stop drinking. No matter what I do, I can't stop drinking. And coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. 4.5 years later, hitting a bottom in Alcoholics Anonymous where I want to commit suicide cold sober because I can't shut my head down. Hitting another bottom in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a surrender, okay? Hitting a bottom to produce a surrender, which cut the ego, because it's my ego that kept saying to me, okay, I figured it out. Oh, or I heard it in a meeting. Now I'll do better. I heard the right speaker. I have the right sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now I can treat Ann better. You know, talk about this a lot. I remember being sober over 4 years. I hate to say this in a meeting with a lot of Al-Anons, but it's the absolute truth for me. I'm sober over 4 years and a few months. I'm secretary of a meeting. It's while Ann and I are having this in and out relationship. Every other day, one of us is asking for a divorce. But I'm secretary of a meeting. I come home from work. It's a Thursday night. I walk in the house. I expect dinner on the table because Mr. Sobriety's home. I walk in. There's no dinner. I give her the look. I say a few words. I go out. I set up the meeting, put the coffee pot together, and I'm sitting there. There's nobody else in the meeting except me. Okay. And I start to listen to what people have to say. I said, you know what? Maybe these fights aren't her fault. Maybe some are my fault. Let me listen to what everybody has to say. And I listened to a lady share in that meeting, and she spoke about the way she treated her husband and the way she treated her kids. And I thought to myself, you just apply what she said, Ron, and everything will be okay. And 3 or 4 people later, they called on a man, and the man's same message she had. He talked about his home life, the way he treated his wife, the way he treated his kids. And I thought, you just apply that. That ever happened to anybody else here? You go to a meeting and you think you heard the right thing, and now I know what to do. And that's exactly what I thought. And I think that happens to us no matter what program we're in. We heard the magic words, now I'm okay. And I clean up the coffee pot after the meeting's over, and I drive home. And it's no more than 15, 20 minutes from the time I held hands with the people next to me and said the Lord's Prayer. And I walked in the house. And I'm a neat freak. I think everything should be in its place, okay? You come into our house today, look at my office, the man cave, whatever. Everything's in its place. I just believe that, okay? It's wrong, but I believe it. I walked in the house that night. Okay, 4.5 years sober, secretary of a meeting. I heard the magic words. I walk in, and the first thing I see is a sock laying on the floor. And Ann was doing the laundry that night, and there's clothes all over the living room because she was sorting them. But I walked in, I saw the clothes, I saw the sock on the floor. And the first words I said to her, I said, Ann, I said, I'm sober over 4 years, and you can't even clean the damn house yet. And 15 minutes earlier, I'm in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm saying I'll do better. So when Dr. Silkworth wrote this, okay, that the first is that I have to hit bottom is evident. I know that I hit bottom, okay? But in time, 2 additional facts have manifested themselves. The first was that a reduced ego has marvelous recuperative powers. See, I want to be in charge. I want to look and say, you're not doing it right. What's that sock on the floor? I bought you a house. Keep it clean. And I say things or I think things, and I'm back in trouble again because my ego has come back. Okay. The second was surrender is essentially a disciplinary function and experience. In other words, to me, this emotional sobriety is me getting out of the driver's seat. Our big book of Alcoholics Anonymous several times talks about quit playing God. What I heard Rick say this morning, he talked about something similar on the part I was able to get to about giving up control. Giving up control to me is for me to quit playing God, for me to not try to control what's going on around me. Because as soon as I do that, I start to push, I start to shove, I start to look at a world that's wrong in my head. In my head, like I said, I'll get out of the shower after having 2 people that I wanted to straighten out. This is what it is. I got to straighten this person out because of what they did. And when I go to work, when I used to work, you know, my boss said this or a client said this, and I'm right in here all the time. Okay. So when he says surrender is a disciplinary action, it's not something I can will. You know, I'd love to ask for a show of hands here because I think most of the hands would go up. If I said, how many people have had emotional problems go on in their lives and said to themselves, I'm going to do better. I know the answer now. And all of a sudden, something happens. Somebody pushes, somebody says something wrong, and the same words come out of our mouths. Yeah, yeah. I see people going, yeah, I understand that. I understand. So how do I get past that? Because it wasn't willpower. When I'm sober 4.5 years and I heard that lady and I heard that man and I said, just apply it, Ron. The fights are off. Everything's going to be fine. But now there's a sock on the floor. Now you're watching the wrong TV program. Now my boss is saying this. Now a client wants to leave. What do I do then? I go to me and I'm right back in trouble. I'm right back in trouble because I say, I got to straighten this out. And I'm thinking and I'm pushing and I'm shoving and I'm right back where I started. Dr. Silkworth goes on to say, the first is merely a fact known to us all. It is common knowledge that a return of a full-fledged ego can happen at any time. Years of sobriety are no insurance against its resurgence. No AA or Al-Anon or any other program that's on here, regardless of his or her veteran status, can ever relax his guard against an encroachment of a reviving ego. Recently, one AA, writing to another, reported that he is suffering, he feared, from halitosis. Any of us that are old timers here think, oh, I have the answer. It's my ego right back in charge. All of a sudden, I'm right back in charge. Okay. That I'm suffering from halitosis, a reference to the smugness of self-complacency, which so easily can creep into the individual with years of sobriety behind him. There's a lot of other things that I have looked at to try to find out about ego. I read some things. I'm an extensive reader. You know, our big book and our 12 and 12. Our big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, as far as spirituality, it says, make use of what your priest, minister, or rabbi has to offer. Our 12 and 12 says our libraries and houses of worship are treasure troves of information. So I do a lot of reading and I do a lot of studying as far as how can I apply these steps more in my life? What is the problem? And as far as ego is concerned, I learned a lot from reading Dr. Thibault, also reading a guy named Dr. Silman. I've also read a lot and studied a lot by Eckhart Tolle and Wayne Dyer. And what I have come to find out is there are 6 main elements of my ego. And I think this is true for all of us, okay? There are 6 things that my ego holds on to. And what they are I am what I have. Look at my house. Look at my job. Look at, a lot of us have done this with kids or grandkids. You know, you see the signs. My child is an honor student. Second, I am what I do. I am what I do. Okay. We can look at that in Alcoholics Anonymous, speaking or secretarying or whatever it is. I saw that last year with my youngest granddaughter, and I said to my wife, we teach them young this thing that our ego grabs onto. I am what I do. My youngest granddaughter is 5 years old now, but she started playing soccer when she was 4. Her dad is one of the coaches. Ann and I went down and watched all the soccer games. Now, these kids are little 4 or 5-year-old kids, okay? They run in the wrong direction. They kick the ball out of bounds. I mean, they don't know what they're doing, but they're having fun, right? So it's the 2nd or 3rd game of soccer last year. And my little granddaughter kicks a goal, okay? The ego holds on to, I am what I do. I watched her dad pick her up as the coach because he's right on the field. Yay! We ran out on the field. Her other set of grandparents ran out on the field. We're yelling and screaming and everything else. And, when we walked off, I said to Ann, I said, look how we teach them young. I am what I do. Score a goal, you're okay. I watched that next week. There was a little boy on the team who was really, really a good player. I mean, that kid probably scored 5 or 6 goals every single week. But the following week, This kid didn't score. He had a really bad game. And after the game, I saw that little boy sitting on the bench crying, because we teach people, same as we were taught. I am what I do. Do good, you're okay. Do bad, you're not. I am my reputation. Anybody here, I'd love to ask for a show of hands, but anybody here ever get their feelings hurt because somebody didn't recognize you? I am my reputation. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I am my reputation. That's ego. I'm separate. I've had two heroes in Alcoholics Anonymous, men that I was close with and that helped me. The first was a guy that died many years ago. He was in my life, I think my first 8 years of sobriety. His name was Chuck C., or Chuck Chamberlain. And Chuck used to always talk about this fourth part of ego, which is I'm separate. There are 235 people on this meeting, and then there's me. That's what my head says. That's what my head says. I had a sponsor, and he's still a good friend of mine in Alcoholics Anonymous. He puts it perfectly. Somebody pointed out to him one time, they said, Bob, you see all those shadows around you? And he said, yeah. He says, those are actually other people. Because we're separate. It's me and then everybody else. And then there's defiance. I defy the facts. Now, Dr. Silman writes this, and this is interesting to me. He said and he's a psychiatrist, he said after studying many types of people, the one that that we just have it in the absolute pure form are alcoholics. Defiance. And what do I mean by that? I did this drunk. I did this sober. I defy the facts. Drunk, I would go out and I would get drunk and I'd get in all kinds of trouble. And then I'd say to myself, this time it'll be different. Sober, okay, and maybe other people can relate to this. You get in a fight with your spouse and you think, okay, I learned my lesson. Now I know I won't say that. But all of a sudden that spouse pushes certain buttons and the same words come out of your mouth. Defiance. And the last one I love is grandiosity. Grandiosity. There's not an alcoholic I've ever met anywhere that doesn't think, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, but my case is just a little different. There's not a person I've ever met that thinks, yeah, I may understand what you're saying, but I'm a little smarter than the average bear. And that's ego, and it's a reoccurring ego. And we're going to have a break in about 2 minutes, but one of the things that Dr. Silman and Dr. Thibault wrote that explained to me why, with these 6 elements of ego, why my life is unmanageable, is they're learned in this area. I'm not, okay? But what they said is there's 2 parts of the human mind. There's the conscious mind, like if I say I'm going to pick up this pad, I can do it, or I'm going to pick up this water and drink some, I do it. That's my conscious mind. But he said the other part of our mind is the subconscious part, which I can do absolutely nothing about. And these men of science and men of medicine say that the ego resides in the subconscious part of our minds. So what does that mean? I get in trouble. I'm drunk, sober, Al-Anon, it makes no difference. I listen to something, I say, boy, I'm going to apply that. I learned my lesson now. I know how to do better. That's my conscious mind, because this is all about surrender. This is all about letting a higher power run my life instead of me. That's what surrender means. Okay? But that's in my conscious mind. I go to sleep at night. It's my conscious mind that sleeps. My subconscious, where the ego is, says, that's a bunch of bull, man. You're sober a long time. You did this workshop today. You know what's best for people. And it comes right back. What Dr. Thibault writes in his paper, which is absolutely scary. Now, he's talking for the alcoholic, but I don't care if it's the alcoholic or not. He says the alcoholic is frightened by his drinking. From the day I got to Alcoholics Anonymous to today, have not had a problem with drinking, but I've had a problem with trying to run my own life. So I'm frightened by what goes on in my life. But then he goes on to say this: I'm prevented from doing anything about it on a permanent basis because of the ego that resides in the subconscious that overrides what my conscious mind perceives. That is an unmanageable life. That's why I need an ongoing relationship with these 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we're going to have a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10 after 1, and I'd like to go through the steps, both the challenges I've had with them and what I try to do today. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.